China's capacity and goals and attitudes about these issues really need to be looked at in terms of more confined sets of issues, if you will. And this is what we'll really try to do, focusing on questions of China's leadership transition and how it prepares China or does not prepare China for questions of its future international roles, including how Chinese themselves debate questions of their future international influence. Secondly, to look at China as a military factor in the equation as we look at China's progression towards military modernization and whether or not and how that might shape attitudes that China might develop, what its aspirations might be, if we can identify them. And finally, to look at what still to me seems to me the most important thing, not to look so much at China as a global factor, but much more China within its own immediate region. I don't want to call that the hardy perennials of these issues, but it does seem to me that questions of China's power and China's policy closer to home will really be something that gives us a sense of a direction and indication about the longer term.
First of all, it seems to me that this new leadership is going to have to take a fairly long period, longer than usual period, of having to establish its legitimacy, its control over the bureaucracy, and therefore it's not going to be in a position to be terribly assertive in international terms until they're much more secure in their positions. I think the previous panel, for those who were here, kind of brushed over the deep divide and debate going on, which Bo Xilai's removal represents. There's a lot more undercurrent about changes in policy, including the, Taoyang Guanghui, bide your time and don't stand out position of Deng Xiaoping. There's an awful lot of debate going on now, and a lot of people pushing for China to take a more assertive role. And here again, I would second Alan Romberg's comments in the earlier panel that people really make a huge difference. It will make a huge difference whether, for example, Liu Yuan gets promoted to a top position like the GPD or vice chairman of the military commission, or someone with a much less aggressive kind of policy posture. So I think, given that the Chinese leadership does not seem to have prepared itself terribly well in the military or political spheres, is one indicator that it's not really going to be prepared in the short term to take much of an international leadership role. I think there are other fairly compelling reasons to make that same argument.
I think China's current approach on the Korean Peninsula, its relationship with North Korea, does raise some very serious questions about China's leadership role and its capability of being a leader in the region. For many people who look at China and look at Chinese policy on North Korea, many people see China not necessarily so much as part of the solution, but as part of the problem when it comes to North Korea. Some people see China as the enabler, if you will, of North Korea. Those are very harsh judgments. I don't necessarily agree with them, but it is a view, and it also is a view held by some in Washington. So it's something I think we have to deal with. It's also a view that's held elsewhere in the region as well. While those may be very harsh judgments, I think it is fair to say that if you look at the history of the interaction between Beijing and Pyongyang, particularly in recent years, you come away with the sense that China values the very tenuous stability that exists on the Korean Peninsula a lot more than it fears the consequences of a nuclear-armed North Korea. I don't think that's a harsh judgment. I think you can make a case for that. I also think you can make a case for the fact that China seems to value, and has seemed to value over the years, the face and sensitivities of its erstwhile North Korean ally a lot more than it treasures the goal of a denuclearized North Korea.
The military modernization program has a timeline that has been defined by Beijing. They defined it in public to us in 2006 with milestones at 2010 and 2020 with a completion date at 2049. And in 2006, they defined that goal for completion in 2049 or 100, or the mid-century is what they say. But 2049 is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the PRC. And they defined that goal as to be able to fight and win a local war under informationalized conditions. 2 years later, they redefined that goal just to be to complete modernization by mid-century. I believe there they understood, if in 2049 we're only going to fight an informationized war, we may be about 40 years behind the time. So I think they've opened up their goal to be, well, we're going to be ready to do what we need to do at 2049. And perhaps at that time, when their modernization program is complete, will they have they also have completed all their studies about taking a more active leadership role in some military missions outside of China. Perhaps after their modernization process is complete, will they be looking more to be externally oriented and take more of a lead?